I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think this is going to be a timely discussion on Catholic social thought and libertarianism. This panel is Libertarian Economics and Catholic Social Teaching, and we really want to look at that Catholic social teaching. The topic's not new. Libertarianism has been debated in various forms and discussed and advocated for some time, but I think we'd all agree that there's kind of a renewed interest that we're seeing now, and it's attracting a rather eclectic band of followers, as we've seen in some of the recent political campaigns. What struck me is my kids, their college friends, how many of them were being very interested in, for example, the Ron Paul campaign and now the Rand Paul campaign, and getting attracted to those. So there's something there that has caught the imagination of some young people and obviously is influencing a lot of policy debates. I've been interested in it and its relationship to Catholic doctrine and social thought for some time, particularly in the aspect of how libertarian assumptions have penetrated, in a sense, both sides of the aisle, and is a part of the polarization that we've been looking at. I'm very pleased to be able to facilitate the panel discussion, and I'll tell you a little bit about our format. We'll begin with short talks from each of our four distinguished panelists. Then we'll offer up a few follow-up questions. I'll ask a few follow-up questions for the panel for their discussion to elaborate on some points they've made. And then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. And I think because we have quite a mix of people here, that should be a really interesting highlight of the event. The first person who will be speaking is Meghan Clark. There's rather nice biographies in the program, so I don't think we have to read them all at great length. But just to point out, she's an assistant professor of theology and religious studies and moral theology at St. John's University. And her primary research area is Catholic social doctrine, with a special interest in human rights, solidarity, and the role of the family and community in healthcare. So welcome, Meghan.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. As I began preparing for today, I went back and reread some of the classic texts of libertarianism, which provide the intellectual claims for today's political libertarian agenda. Freedom to Choose by Rose and Milton Friedman is particularly striking. Neither equality before God nor equality of opportunity presented any conflict with liberty to shape one's life. Quite the opposite. Equality and liberty were two faces of the same value, that every individual should be viewed as an end in himself. End quote. The Friedman's interpretation of the U.S. founding sounds appealing. The language mimics that of Kant's categorical imperative, that each person is to be treated as an end in herself and never merely as a means to an end. And yet, I have this overwhelming urge to say, wait a second. Like Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride, I don't think those words mean what it is you think they mean. When you look closely, something else is going on here. The definition of equality before God is rooted entirely in individual choice, and the definition of equality of opportunity as merely a lack of arbitrary obstacles. This is not Kant's categorical imperative. But even more important for our discussion today, this is not Catholic theology's understanding of equality before God or equality of opportunity. This is not a Catholic understanding of the human person. In my brief time with you today, I'd like to focus on two distinct yet related points. The Catholic understanding of the human person as created in the image and likeness of God. And second, what this means in terms of the Church's social teaching, focusing mostly on Vatican II's Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution on the Church in the modern world, and brief reference to Pope Francis's teaching. Since time will not allow, perhaps in the discussion, this all underpins what is Catholic social thought's understanding of solidarity, and why, if properly understood, it does not incorporate libertarianism, but actually exposes libertarianism as deficient. The image of God, Imago Dei, In the book of Genesis, we hear, "Then God said, 'Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness.' So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." All discussions of human dignity and the human person for Catholic theology begin with this, that all human persons are created equally in the image and likeness of God. Catholic moral theology and Catholic social doctrine in particular are largely a series of reflections and applications beginning with this very point. There is radical equality before God. We are all equally loved by God, and it is this equality, being equally loved by God, that grounds Catholic social thought's understanding of the preferential option for the poor. Equality before God is not primarily about freedom of choice, but relationship. And here I'd like to focus on two elements in the Catholic understanding of the human person as relational and social. First, the question of creation itself, and then what creation in the image of a triune God might mean for the human community. Perhaps the most important divergence between Catholicism and libertarianism is this very basic theological claim. I do not create myself. I do not call myself into existence, and I always exist in relationships, both to other persons and to God. We are not simply individuals who should choose to enter into community and relationship. While the freedom of individual person allows for a great many choices, to be a human person is to be in community. This is not something from which we are able to opt out of. Human freedom is crucial in this, but it is not reducible to negative liberty. Pope Benedict XVI urged us to resist what he called the intoxication with total autonomy as what true freedom is. For Catholic social thought, it is freedom to love, freedom for human flourishing, freedom for community, freedom for God. These all shape our understanding of freedom and begin with the fact that we are inescapably relational. I began with a verse from Genesis 1, and in that verse, we see human persons are created from the very beginning in community. Far from reducing the importance of freedom, this deeper and broader approach elevates freedom, and with it, our responsibility before God. The divergence between Catholicism and libertarianism I've pointed at hinges on creation and the implications of the image of God for human community. While we may be able to achieve significant agreement that human persons are social and interdependent, I need other people to survive. This is not the core of how Catholicism understands the human community. Human society is not something that is a requirement for survival. It is a good. It is part of how we're in the image of God, because we believe that God is triune. If we are created imago Dei, that must also mean we are imago Trinitatis. Throughout Christian history, theological schools have answered this in different ways. But today, I want to invite you to think more deeply about the idea, how might we be in the image of God? Relation, then, isn't atomized and added up, but points us towards Jesus' prayer in the Gospel of John, that they might be one as we are one. And so we end up with the Trinity and equality, mutuality, and reciprocity, providing quite a clear and challenging normative criteria by which to evaluate whether or not we as a community are imaging God more or less fully in the world. It also links us as one human family created in the image of God. Thus, we end up where libertarianism cannot. Our humanity is not only a matter of creation, but places a claim on us. In a speech to Georgetown, U2 frontman Bono challenged students that, quote, when you truly accept that those in some far-off place in the global village have the same value as you in God's eyes, or even just in your own eyes, then your life is forever changed. You see something that you simply cannot unsee. The image of God places a claim upon us that goes well beyond simply not actively harming or impeding others. Instead, as Pope Paul VI stated in Popularum Progressio, there can be no progress toward the complete development of the human person without the simultaneous development of all humanity in the spirit of solidarity. Reflecting on that same passage from Genesis 1, Vatican II's Church in the Modern World emphasizes the presence of human community at creation, and building on that, the council said, quote, God did not create the person for life in isolation, but for the formation of social unity. And so it pleased God to make men holy and save them not merely as individuals without any mutual bonds, but by making them into a single people. So far from the beginning of salvation history, he has chosen people, and not as individuals, but as members of a certain community. In Christianity, God enters into relationships, covenants, with peoples not just living together, but succeeding generations, reaching across our traditional understandings of past, present, and future. Already in 65, globalization and interdependence was understood as radically pervasive and universal in reach. The council explained, quote, in our times, a special obligation binds us to make ourselves the neighbor of absolutely every person, and of actively helping him when he comes across our path, whether he be an old person abandoned by all, a foreign laborer unjustly looked upon, or a hungry person. Gaudium et Spes, like St. John the 23rd's Peace on Earth before it, offers a comprehensive account of what must be accounted for in upholding human dignity and the flourishing community. And it is made up of a basic set of human rights. The concerns are always both personal and structural, recognizing that, in the words of the council, human freedom is often crippled when a man falls into extreme poverty. Again, note, human freedom is crippled by extreme poverty, whether arbitrary obstacles exist or not. The freedom discussed is not reducible to negative liberty. Integrating the Catholic view of the person and community, the U.S. bishops in their 1986 economic pastoral offered an integrated moral vision, which placed participation as central to an ethical evaluation of the economy, policy, and social arrangements more broadly. Economic justice for all defines basic justice as participation, as the minimum conditions for the person's participation in the economic, social, and political life of the community. Catholic social thought develops this social vision into an integrated understanding of poverty as exclusion. Pope Francis has unequivocally reminded us that this involves a radical call to community. When asked in the now famous Jesuit interview why he continues to live at Santa Marta Guest House and not the papal apartment, it wasn't for reasons of humility and simplicity, though he certainly models those things. It was because he said, I cannot live without people. I need to live my life with others. And expanding in Lumen Fide, that understanding of self-knowledge is only possible when we share in greater memory. You notice as you look through these, along with the joy of the gospel, it sounds an awful like what we hear in Gaudium et Spes at Vatican II. There is no full identity without belonging to a people. No one is saved alone as an isolated individual. But God attracts us looking at the complex web of relationships that take place in the human community. And God enters into these relationships. To understand what Pope Francis says on poverty, inequality, and exclusion, you have to first understand this deep unity of the one human family, of our belonging to each other and our standing together before God as the necessary backdrop. The threat of libertarianism as a starting point is that it creates a barrier to seeing the other as neighbor, as our brother and sister. My humanity is bound up in yours. This is concrete, not abstract. In a visit to the Jesuit Refugee Center in Rome, Pope Francis addressed the refugees, saying, to serve means to work alongside the neediest. First of all, to establish a close human relationship with them based on solidarity. Solidarity. This word elicits fear in the developed world. They try not to say it. It is almost a dirty word for them. But it is our word. Theologically, we're now back to the very heart of Christianity. Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh, God becoming human. Solidarity is our word. This passage has followed me around for the last year, actually serving as the inspiration for a paper I will deliver later this week at the Catholic Theological Society of America. And I cannot think of a clearer way to show the divergence between Catholicism and libertarianism than the radical identification of Jesus with the marginalized in Matthew 25. What we get in Matthew 25 is not that we should care for the poor, but that Jesus is the poor, that whatsoever you do for the least, you do for me. And so we have to think very long and hard about any standpoint, any framework that may make it more difficult for us to see the face of Christ in a neighbor that in other areas may not seem as like us. Not in our normal day-to-day lives do we encounter them. This ends up with Catholic social thought's understanding of solidarity as both a personal and social virtue by which we commit ourselves to participation in the universal common good of all people, by all people.